Hello everybody, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Welcome to today's Critical Thought. We are looking back at the Sega Dreamcast. First, thank you to 649 followers here on YouTube. Thanks so much for subscribing. So, as a more proof that I am old, it was the 17th year anniversary of the Sega Dreamcast 3 days ago as of this recording. Sega Dreamcast would go on to be Sega's final attempt at the console wars of the early thousands, and pretty much that final transition from the older console wars to the three-way front we're at now between Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. But the Dreamcast was a pretty good system. However, issues within and beyond its control kind of led to its demise. We got right here one of my favorite games, Phantasy Star Online. If you won't see the little sticker there, but it says that there's a exclusive demo for Sonic Adventure 2 on here. I wonder how that turned out. So the Sega Dreamcast obviously came after the Sega Saturn, and for that time, Sega was hurting from the Saturn. It wasn't as big of a success as they wanted, and they had that issue of really coming out at that awkward time. I think the Sega Saturn was a 32-bit system, although my memory is fading on that. But they were overshadowed by the release of the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation 1. So they really had to rally with the Dreamcast. And Dreamcast was basically going to be their Hail Mary play. At this time, Nintendo was still doing good. Despite no longer being considered the undisputed king, they were still having really great sales. They had the profits from the Game Boy and, of course, Pokemon to help them out. Sega didn't have that. The Game Gear, too many things begin with the word game, was just okay. It never lit things up as the Game Boy did. And when Nintendo released like the Game Boy Advance and higher iterations or more powerful versions, the Game Gear just kind of fell by the wayside. So the Dreamcast really was going to be their big shot. Released in 1999, this was going to be before the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox. This was their big system. And they definitely went all out in terms of promoting it. There was, of course, the big $99.99, which I remember being there midnight at Funkoland. Once again, I feel very old, getting my system and a copy of Sonic Adventure. Now, the Dreamcast, in terms of its library, was quite interesting. This was that transition period where consoles were starting to rival and take over in terms of graphical quality for the arcade. And the Dreamcast was was pretty much the first system to really start getting arcade quality games ported to it. There's, of course, another favorite game of mine, Soul Calibur. But there are many other games, including there was a zombie killing game, Power Stone, I think not Virtual Cop, there's another one. There's so many games it's hard to remember. Let's see, Ready to Rumble, House of the Dead, Typing of the Dead, which is another great one that I just remembered, got its real start on the Dreamcast, and a lot more. But Sega was really shooting for the fences with the Dreamcast. Sonic Adventure, as you can see, there we go, over there, that's actually number 2, was a complete redefinement of the Sonic games, featuring more adventure elements, multiple characters to play as, and they were really trying to essentially outdo Nintendo with Mario, which at the time, of course, Mario basically defined 3D gaming with Super Mario 64. Remember, this was going to be a few years before Sunshine, Galaxy, and all those great games. With the Dreamcast, Sega was trying to essentially get ahead of the curve. This was the first system to have built-in dial-up online connections. Dial-up, a horror which thankfully you folks will never have to experience ever again. But at the time, it was still considered cutting edge for a console. And Phantasy Star over here was pretty much the first online console game to have built-in basically connectivity. It was basically going to be a MMO for the console. Now, of course, MMOs were out since the days of EverQuest, and this would still be a few years before World of Warcraft, but it was still a very entertaining game nonetheless. This was still during the heights of Sonic Team, which were still doing really well, and of course Sonic Adventure being a pretty good game. Now, the library for the Dreamcast was kind of odd, and I think this is one of the things that kind of led to its demise. Of course, Sega released some really great first-party games, again, Sonic, Phantasy Star, even stuff like Echo the Dolphin, and Shenmue, which we'll come back to in a few minutes. But its third-party lineup was kind of weird. It was sort of like the C and B listers of the time. You weren't going to see too many EA games. There weren't any Squaresoft or Enix titles. I can't remember the exact time where Square Enix basically became one, but there weren't any of them. And of course, obviously no Nintendo games and stuff like that. So we had a very weird mix of third-party titles. There were games like Illbleed, Toy Commander, Sword of the Berserk, even stuff like Ikaruga. But in terms of like the big names, there really weren't any. And it was kind of up to Sega and its second-party teams to really round out the library. I think like the most popular third-party game would probably be Soul Calibur, which again was one of the first arcade games to not only be fully ported to the console, but I think also be superior to its arcade version, with a greatly expanded single-player campaign and stuff like that. But the big game, and I'm sure, as I said a few minutes ago, you know, is Shenmue. Shenmue was again Sega essentially trying to throw their Hail Mary play. It was developed by Yu Suzuki of Virtual Fighter fame. It took, I think, 4 years of development, supposedly an estimated $42 million to develop, which was unheard of at that time. And this was going to be the console and even generation-defining title. This was one of the first open-world games, predating the Grand Theft Auto series, first game to really introduce QTEs to the modern audience, and again, a game that really tried to step things up in terms of production quality, acting, storytelling, etc. But, as we know, the game just did not do well. There were reports that the dubbing team had to rush through it. Again, the game was delayed, cost so much money, and it definitely didn't earn back enough. And Yu Suzuki was hoping to turn this into, I think, a 4-game series. The second game was released in Europe and Japan on the Dreamcast and was really great. I may still have a copy of it somewhere around here, but it greatly improved on things. And if that was the first game, it was going to probably sell a lot better. As a fun side note, Shenmue would eventually become the spiritual prequel to the Yakuza series, which would sort of, I guess, carry the torch from then on. But it's time for the big question. What really happened to the Dreamcast? And I can tell you what happened in one word. The PlayStation. As you know, the Dreamcast came out in 1999. And this would be, again, that big transitioning point where the console wars became a little bit more standardized, and the game industry started to transition towards the model that we're at now, with a unified gamepad and unified control schemes and philosophies across the board. The Dreamcast, however, really came out at the wrong time. If it would have came out maybe a year, maybe 2 years earlier than that, and have that solid time frame to build a consumer base and basically get its foundation going, things would have been different. But unfortunately for Sega and the Dreamcast, Sony basically started promoting the PlayStation 2 pretty much around the time of the Dreamcast, saying that this was going to be the next big thing, and pointing out numbers of technical quality, and that this was going to be so many more times better than the Dreamcast. And one other detail really helped: DVD functionality. Again, for you young folks, DVDs and Blu-rays seem like old hat. But back during the early thousands, DVDs were this new and amazing thing. It was going to be the new format and amazing, and it's going to probably cost us an arm and a leg like VHS did back in the day. But Sony basically said, you buy our system, DVD player right there, you don't need any new hookups, you don't need anything else, play games, it can do everything. And guess what happened? People flocked to the PlayStation. And while the Dreamcast did have a steadily increasing library, the PlayStation 2 just, again, was a fantastic console. Probably having one of the best and most diverse libraries out of, I think, almost all the consoles, with exception to maybe the Super Nintendo back in the day. But the Dreamcast, again, it quickly and very poorly for Sega fell out of technological superiority. It was essentially, again, built to take on the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation 1. It wasn't built to take on the PlayStation 2. And if that was just their only competition, they may have had a chance. But then 1 year later, of course, Microsoft showed up and the Nintendo GameCube. And suddenly, Sega's big final plan, their final console to hopefully make it big, ended up in 4th place. And it just wasn't working for them. Microsoft especially killed the Dreamcast with being the first console to have online broadband functionality built in. I could connect my cable line, I think, to it, and I had online access. My Ethernet cable. But again, it was the first system to have this online architecture with Xbox Live. And then the GameCube showed up with even better graphics and more superiority to the Dreamcast. And with all those factors, things just slowly fell out under the Dreamcast. There's also reports of behind-the-scenes issues with the heads having trouble deciding how they wanted to take the Dreamcast further. But I don't have first-hand knowledge, so I can't comment on that. But sadly, the Dreamcast did end, and I can tell you exactly when I heard it. I was literally playing Phantasy Star Online when I heard the news that the Dreamcast was going out and that Sega was dropping out of the console wars. Now, I guess in terms of a quote-unquote happy ending, Sega has managed to bounce back. They may not be one of the top-tier developers, but they were able to recoup and have become a somewhat successful third-party developer / publisher. And I think that was the wise decision for them, because the Dreamcast simply was a sinking ship. With only about a year, maybe even less than that in terms of superiority, they just weren't able to pull together. But that is history for you. So we're going to wrap up today's critical thought. Like I said, I was trying to be a little bit more happier after yesterday's downer. But as a preview for tomorrow, I got another depressing topic to talk about. But we'll leave it today, so rest in peace, Sega Dreamcast. Thank you, Phantasy Star Online, for providing me my first real online experience. And I will see you all again tomorrow with another great critical thought and more great videos here on YouTube. If you have any comments or remembering your own favorite Sega Dreamcast titles, be sure to leave them below. And once again, thank you to 649 subscribers. We're so close to that bubble of 650 and then beyond. So, thanks again for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow. Take care. Thanks for watching the video, everybody. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment, of course, share with your friends. It always helps out. Check out game-wisdom.com, where I examine the art and science of games. You can follow me on Twitch and Twitter under GW Bycer for the latest updates of new content. And be sure to check out our Patreon campaign. You can find us on Patreon under Game Wisdom if you would like to donate and help contribute to keeping Game Wisdom going. Your donations can not only give us the monthly funding we need to keep supporting ourselves, but if we can hit some goals, it will mean more great content for you, and there are some nifty little rewards there as well. Thanks for watching this video, and be sure to tune into the next one real soon.